I've been asked to come up and present a little bit on sort of the pragmatic side of things. So things are bad. There's atrocities happening. Terrible things are going on. How do we, as parents, as grandparents, as teachers, as adults of conscience, how do we help our kids? And I want to read an email. Aaron and I, we're from Advocates Protecting Children. We get emails from parents every week. We get at least one a week, more than that usually. It's usually the same story. My child just announced that he or she is transgender. Aaron and I can pretty well quote what the email is going to say because this is a script. This is a cult. I chose that word for my book very thoughtfully and after a lot of research and talking with a lot of people who've been through this. But I want to read, and I'm old enough now, I need my glasses. I want to read an email that we just got 2 days ago. Think about what you might tell this mom. My 16-year-old stepdaughter just came out to us as trans. She lives full-time with her mom. We get her every other weekend. Her mom is a hypochondriac and would definitely love the attention she would get from this. It may even border on Munchausen by proxy. Munchausen by proxy is where a parent gets a charge out of the medical attention that their child gets from medical professionals. Our daughter simply says she isn't, quote, comfortable in her body, unquote, and she, quote, feels like a boy, unquote. She says she likes boys and thinks she's a gay boy in a girl's body. This stuff can be hard to wrap your head around. Her mother is allowing her to wear a binder and has put her in counseling with a gender-affirming counselor. We have tried to affirm her feelings without giving in to her demands regarding name and pronouns. As the stepmom since she was 2, I feel like I have to keep my mouth shut and let my husband deal with it. At the same time, we have a 12-year-old daughter together that I want to protect. I want to say that her big sister can't be around my daughter, but I know that would hurt both of our girls. I don't know what to say or do that shows love to my stepdaughter without putting our 12-year-old in an unhealthy environment. Help. Aaron and I have been talking about it. We're not sure what to say yet to this mom. That's an incredibly difficult situation. When a child comes out as transgender, it affects everybody. It affects everyone in the family. It affects the siblings. It affects the friends. I spoke at my own church just the night before last, and a woman came up to me and said that her brother had announced a transgender identity, and it had split the family because anybody in the family who isn't saying, yay, wahoo, this is fantastic, has been cut out. It's incredibly painful, and I think a lot of people don't appreciate how hard this is on families. So what can we do? I'm not sure which button. Is it this button? Is it the top button to advance? The bottom up, thank you. Oh, that one. There we go, okay. You've heard a lot about where this is coming from, and I really want to emphasize that everything you've heard so far today is true, and schools are really at the heart of this web. The National Education Association is pushing this. It's coming from the big pharma, the gender clinics. I have been quoting several market studies that I came across. If you just do market study, sex reassignment surgery, you'll find listing after listing after listing that sex reassignment surgery alone is a growth market expected to be worth $1.5 billion with a B by 2026. That's shocking. But I went back this past week just to reaffirm, see if I'm still seeing that. Now the studies are saying this is going to be a $30 billion industry by 2030. And that's just surgeries. That's not the hormones. This is being driven by money. As Mary said, this is being driven ideologically. Social media is driving it. There are influencers on social media. So a hurting child goes to social media or just to Google and says, why am I so unhappy? Why don't I fit in? Why don't I have friends? And there are a host of people that are ready to tell that child, it's because you're not really a girl. It's because you're not really a boy. This is an atrocity that is happening, and we really, we do well to be aware of where it's coming from, and schools are really at the heart of it. And I hate to say that. I trained as a public school teacher. I was a proponent of public schools up until 4 years ago when I pulled all 3 of my kids, when I saw what was happening. I said, schools are no longer a safe place for children. This is what's happening, and I'm afraid my slides are a little too small to read. Schools are teaching trans ideology as fact across the curriculum. People are like, Maria, how can they teach it in math? Well, let's look at a story problem. John came out as non-binary 6 months ago. Sarah came out as transgender 8 months ago. What's the difference in how long they've been identified as transgender? Simple math problem. Social media influencers groom kids. Peer-led sex ed utilizes peer pressure. Some years ago, just a few years ago, I came across this on an NEA, National Education Association website article about peer-led sex ed. And I'm reading this, and it's about kids teaching kids about sex and gender. And I've seen this in my own school district in Arlington, Virginia. There's evidence on our website that older kids, juniors and seniors, were going into freshman, sophomore classes and teaching gender and sexuality in health and PE. Why is this problematic? When you were a freshman, would you dare tell a senior that you didn't agree with him or her, especially if the teacher had invited the senior into the class? But I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, peer-led sex ed, what does this remind me of? And I was like, it's peer-to-peer marketing. It's peer-to-peer sales. When you get invited to somebody's house and they give you drinks and appetizers, and then the Tupperware person or the kitchenware person comes and does a little presentation, you buy something, right? Because it's your friend, and they invited you over, and they gave you drinks, and everybody else is buying something. That is the model that is peer-led sex ed. They're taking marketing strategies and applying it to our children. Libraries are stocking and promoting trans books like crazy. I'm an English teacher. I love literature. About 10, 15 years ago, everything was vampires and werewolves. Do you remember when the Twilight series was out? And I'd go to the library to pick out books for my kids who were then in middle school, and all I could find was vampires and werewolves. And I remember saying, oh, I can't wait till we're done with the vampire and werewolf craze. Now everything is gay and trans. I'm like, wow, vampires and werewolves seem so sweet. I wish we could go back to that. Because it's all this, and frankly, most of them are crap literature. I've been challenged to read some of them because people tell me I'm being judgmental, so I have undertaken to read some. Now, I have read one that is actually good writing. Most of them are crap writing, and the reason they're award-winning is because groups like GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, the Trevor Project, they give awards. They say, we're going to give an award for the best LGBTQ book of the year, and meanwhile, they're sending money to authors to support them to write these books. So there's this glut of all these crap books that then get all these awards, and so they can call themselves award-winning. It's just a vicious circle. Teachers are assigning these books. I saw that with my kids. It's one of the reasons I pulled my kids, is that these books were being assigned to my kids. You've heard about the cosmetic surgeons and the drug companies. Parents are vilified as abusers. Parents are now guilty until proven innocent. This was my entree into this world, was being invited by a friend to a working group meeting in my school district on trans policy, trans students policy. And the ethic around that table of the 12 or 15 people, what we took away from that evening was that parents are a threat to their kids, and the school needs to figure out a way to get the parents out of the equation. I was horrified. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Parents are almost always, except in extreme cases of neglect or abuse, which are rare, parents are almost always their kids' best protectors, without fail. People who try to separate parents from their children are trying to abuse the child almost across the board. That should never happen. And another thing, I'm going off script here a little bit, but we know the best predictor of student success, of long-term success in school and in life, the single best educational predictor is not how much money goes into the school, not the quality of the teacher, not the quality of the materials, it's parental involvement. Parents involved in their kids' education is the single greatest predictor of child success. Now schools are cutting parents out. How does that make any sense at all? So what can we as parents do? This is the talk I gave here when I was here in March, so if you were here, you're going to hear it again. But I was asked at the time, talk both about whether a child is trans-identified already or if they're not. And I thought, ooh, that's like twice as much material. How am I going to fit this all in? But as I was thinking about it, I realized, no, they're the same thing. It's the same thing. We need to be reassuring our kids that we love them, that we're for them, that we see them. And as Mary said, and as Andrew said, these kids are suffering. This is real. People are suffering real pain, whether they're dealing with a bullying situation, whether they're dealing with autism, whether they're dealing with depression, with prior trauma. They are in pain. They are moving into this ideology because people are promising them this is going to fix their pain. And as Mary's tried to point out so eloquently, it doesn't fix their pain, and we're seeing that. But whether you have a child who you think is moving this direction or you just want to make sure your child doesn't move this direction, figure out what's happening with your child. Does your child have vulnerabilities that are going to make them susceptible to this? If you have children on the autism spectrum, there are some very specific things that make autistic kids susceptible to this message. One of them is a lot of times autistic kids, people have physical sensitivities to their clothing, to their bodies. Puberty is a cataclysm to kids on the autism spectrum because autistic kids don't like change. Puberty is a huge time of change. It's very uncomfortable. They also struggle with social situations. Along comes trans ideology and says, oh, the reason you're uncomfortable in your body is not because you're autistic, it's because you're trans. Oh, the reason you don't get along with people and you don't fit in is because you're trying to fit in with the wrong people. You're not really a girl, you're a boy. These are some susceptibilities. I'm hearing more that, oh, there's a big correlation between autistic people and trans ideology or trans identification, which means autistic people are more likely to be trans. No, it doesn't. It means there's some susceptibilities there, just like there are with prior trauma, with depression. So figure out what's going on with your child. What milieu is your child in? If your child's in public school, they're being introduced to this. I can just tell you that. They're being introduced to this. I'm from northern Indiana, very rural community. I was back there recently, and I keep hearing, oh, it's not in our schools, not in our schools. And my mom just sent me a big poster of the local high school with a big coming out day poster in it. It's everywhere because it's coming down from the NEA. So I hate to say this because I know this is a hardship for many people, but I don't propose that you leave your children in public school because this is coming there. Cut off the unhealthy influences. And what we are seeing in advocates with the families who've gotten their kids back is they have primarily done three things. They have pulled from public school, they have rescinded the smartphone, and they have cut off social media. Those are the vectors. Those are the prime vectors for this. No kid needs a smartphone. They don't need it. It is the equivalent, and my pastor just said this at the talk he gave a couple nights ago, giving your kid a smartphone is the equivalent of dropping them on the streets of New York City and saying, have a good time. and leaving them there 24 hours a day. Just let them go. Everybody in the world has access to your child if they have a smartphone. And you can put controls on it, but get them a flip phone. Flip phones do what you need. You can call them, you can text them. They don't need more than that. Third, strengthen your relation. Oh, I didn't talk about the healthy influences. I talked about cutting off the negative ones. Surround your child with healthy influences. It used to be, when I was growing up, parents sent me out the door. Pretty much all the adults agreed about what truth is, what goodness is. Kids don't talk back to adults. Stealing is wrong. Porn is bad. Generally, all the adults agreed. Today, it's just the opposite. If you have a Christian worldview and you send your kid out into the world, there are people actively trying to undermine your message. So trying to cut off as many negative influences, but surround your child with as many positive influences as you can. All the adults in a child's life should be telling the child the same thing. This is one of the insidious things that's happening in schools. Parents say to young children, boys have a penis, girls have a vagina. Child goes to school and says, Mommy said boys have a penis, girls have a vagina. And the teacher says, oh, that's just silly, your parents are wrong. What that does is it makes that child decide, who do I believe? Do I believe my mom and dad? Do I believe my teacher? They have to, at the youngest ages, decide whether they believe their parents or not. That's a job for later adolescence. When kids are 14, 15, 16, that's when naturally they start saying, okay, mom and dad have taught me this stuff all my life. I know what mom and dad believe. Do I believe it too? That's the task of later adolescence. That is not the task for a 4, 5, 6-year-old, and it is unconscionable for schools to force kids to choose that. Strengthen your relationship with your child. If your child is trans-identified, this is extremely important because it is a cult. I absolutely believe it is a cult. It has all 8 hallmarks of a cult. And the cult has stolen your child's loyalty from you. The loyalty is no longer with the family, it is with the cult. You're not going to get that back until you start letting the child see what a lie it is. Because the cult is telling that child, your parents don't love you. Your parents don't want you to be happy. If they're not affirming this, if they're not telling you, you look great as a boy, this is fantastic, so glad we discovered that you're transgender. If they're not supporting it, they hate you. They don't love you. They don't want you to be happy. They're mean, they're bigoted, they're hateful, they're toxic. You need to reestablish your relationship and show the child that you are not those things. It's hard to do. It's hard work. And engage your child's critical thinking abilities. It does not take a lot of logic to cut the legs out from under this ideology. I spoke to one detransitioner who got pulled from public school under duress, was very angry, got put in a very, very conservative Christian environment, did not like it at all, but she said it was the first time her peers started asking her questions about trans ideology. She said, nobody asked these questions in public school. There were no questions. We all agreed with each other. So these conservative Christian kids were asking her questions, and she's like, I'm going to research this, and I'm going to show them how wrong they are. And she said, I started doing research, and I couldn't find anything. I could not find anything to support that this is true. And she said, I had a moment where I said, am I on the wrong side of this? And she's much healthier today. I already talked about this. I went through what's happening. How do you figure out what's happening with your child? Where are they being influenced? Cut off those unhealthy influences. Cutting off unhealthy influences, I think this is worth stopping on for just a minute. There are 3 ways to cut off an unhealthy influence in your child's life. The first one is to just exert your authority. This is an authoritative, bordering on authoritarian way to do it. Just, I'm in charge, I'm the boss. You're not going to have interaction with that person. Depending how old your child is, this works better with younger children than with older children. I'm sure we all know if you were a teenager and you started dating somebody and your mom said, you cannot see that boy, I do not like that boy, you're like, oh, I'm going to see that boy. I'm going to see that boy and you're not going to know. So it doesn't, maybe I'm the only one that ever did that. So I don't recommend that as the best way. But with a young child, if you need to pull from public school, that child may not be happy. Even with an older child, that child may not be happy, but it may be necessary. The second way is to distract the child. If you've ever been around raised toddlers, when the toddler is trying to get the chocolate cake on the counter, saying, no, you can't have that chocolate cake, stop trying to get that chocolate, that never works, right? The better thing to do is to put the chocolate cake away and distract the child with something else. Hey, let's go out and jump on the trampoline. You can do this with older kids too. If you've got a neighbor who is supporting a trans ideology behind your back and maybe inviting your child over to babysit and then get a couple hours of trans affirmation, telling your teenager you can't go over to the neighbor's house on Friday nights is probably not going to work. But if Aunt Susie offers, hey, I've got tickets to a concert this Friday, you want to go to the concert with me? Well, it's one Friday night that the child's going to be distracted. So there are ways to distract. But the best way to get a child to sever a relationship is lead the child to do it themselves if you're able to. We had a situation with my daughter some years ago. We'd had to be sort of authoritative about a few things recently. And so I was trying to kind of back off a little bit, but she came to me and she said, oh, I got an invitation to go play Dungeons and Dragons with this group. I'm like, I didn't hear about this. She was only 12 or 13 at the time, and this adult had emailed her without involving me in it, but I get copies of everything that goes into my kids' email accounts until they're 18, and they know this. I said, when you get an email account, anybody sends you something, it comes to my inbox. So I got a copy of this, but this adult did not know that I saw it. The adult went behind my back. And so I thought, okay, I could just say no, but let's try to reason through this. And I said, why do you think they didn't involve me? She's like, yeah, I don't know, that is kind of weird. I said, it's adults with kids, like teenagers and adults playing D&D together. I said, would you want to play board games with your dad and me? She's like, no. I said, yeah, I didn't think so. That feels kind of weird. She's like, yeah, that is kind of weird. So I said, well, think about it and decide whether you want to go or not. And the next day she said, yeah, I don't really want to do this. And so that was her making her own decision. Now, if she had come back and said, yeah, I think I do, I think I would have taken it. I said, let's go talk to your dad about this. Let's think about this a little more. I wouldn't necessarily have said, okay, you made the decision, you're going to get to go. But the fact that she made the good decision on her own meant I didn't have to take it further than that. Develop your relationship skills and improve your communication skills. In your folder, I asked to be included in there a handout. It's 11 communication skills. And what's in there is for you to hand to someone you care about and are in relationship with and ask them to rate you. And you may be surprised. This is a bit of a dangerous, scary exercise, but it's 11 things for you to ask somebody, how am I doing on this? Do I listen to you? Do you feel listened to when I talk to you? Do I criticize you a lot? If you're a parent, I challenge you to give this to the kid that you're having the hardest relationship with and ask the child to fill it out on you. Tell the child, I'm realizing everybody can improve on their relationship skills, and I want to do better, so I want to hear from you on this. You may hear some things that are very uncomfortable for you. When you get that feedback, do your best to receive it with humility and say, thank you for telling me this. I want to read this, I want to think about it, and I want to talk to you about it. Giving that to your child is such a disarming thing to do because you are telling that child, I really care about you, I care about our relationship, and I realize I'm not perfect. As parents, I think we sometimes have this feeling, this onus, like, I can't make a mistake. I've got to be perfect. I've got to show my kids all the time that I'm perfect. Well, it's unrealistic. None of us except Jesus are perfect. And when you admit that you are imperfect, that you screwed up somehow, and you tell the child, I'm sorry I made that mistake, you are modeling brokenness, forgiveness, repentance, and forgiveness. I went through postpartum depression after my second child, and it manifested in rage. I didn't even know depression could do that, but I would just have these rage fits. I'm going to be very, very open and vulnerable with you and tell you the story. My son was about 2 years old, and it was his little sister was a baby, and that was when I had depression. I didn't know I had it yet, but I remember my son spilling some Cheerios on the table, and I took the bowl and I just threw it at the wall and just screamed about this mess. And I'm horrified at what was going on with me, but that's partly what it took for me to recognize something is wrong. And as I was healing from that, every day I was having a temper fit and breaking down and being a terrible mom, and then having to apologize to my kids and get their forgiveness. And I told my husband, I said, I feel like a hypocrite. Every day I ask my son to forgive me, and he says, I love you, Mommy, and then I do it again the next day. And my husband said, no, he's learning about sin, repentance, and forgiveness. That was about the best thing that my husband could have said to me, and it's true. None of us are perfect parents. We've all screwed up. We've all messed up with our kids. It is right and appropriate to admit that and say, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? So that's a helpful little tool just to open up a conversation with your child. Engage your child's critical thinking abilities. I talked about that a little bit. What does it mean to be born in the wrong body? How do you know you're born in the wrong body? Like, as Mary said, there's no test for it. There's no rubric to figure out how much you might have been born in the wrong body. It's entirely based on your feelings. And we know that feelings can be wrong. Feelings can be really, really powerful. I mean, if you've ever been really, really, really angry, have you ever been angry enough in traffic that you want to hit somebody with your car? I don't mean a pedestrian, but I mean like slam into somebody else with your car. Have you? Okay, I'm not alone. Thank you. Thank you. I'm always like, no, Maria, you're just a really angry person who needs help. That's a real, genuine feeling, but it would be a bad idea to follow through on that feeling, wouldn't it? That would be feelings are red flags to tell us, hey, something's wrong. Kids who are feeling like they were born in the wrong body, that feeling may be very powerful. It may be very compelling. It doesn't mean that's a fact. And I think it might have been Mary earlier also who said, kids who are struggling with anorexia, they may be, I'm 5'7", and if I weighed 85 pounds and I were anorexic, I don't weigh 85 pounds, I just want to tell you that, but if I did, if I were anorexic and looked in the mirror, I would think I was fat. Anorexia actually makes you see things that aren't there. That's not true. My feelings would be very powerful that I have anorexia, but it's not true. And telling me it's true because I feel that way, well, your feelings, everybody needs to affirm your feelings. No, that would lead me to death. Schizophrenics hear voices. They actually see people who aren't there. We don't affirm that. We don't say, yeah, you really should jump off the building like those voices are telling you to. That's not affirmation. That's not care. So asking questions is a good way, whether your kids have started down this path or not, especially with older kids. As our kids age, it's really easy to stay stuck in my child is 7 years old and keep treating them like they're 7 years old. But as I said a little bit ago, by the time a child hits like 12, 13 years old, that child knows everything that you think. They know what you think about pretty much everything. So when that child comes home and says, oh, Susie told me today she's not Susie anymore, now she's Sam and I have to call him he, that's the wrong time to go into, well, transgender ideology is not based on biblical truth. And you have this as a parent, you're like, I want to get this fixed, I want to make sure you don't go down that path. But with an older child, the right question is, oh, wow, what do you think about that? And let the child talk. Very often with older kids, and with me too, sometimes when someone asks me a question about something, once I start talking about it and really talking and hearing myself, I'm like, oh, that's crazy. I'm talking crazy. That doesn't make any sense at all. And you can keep asking those open-ended questions like, well, if gender's fluid, is it fluid or is it fixed? Because if it's fluid, it can change any time, right? If it's truly fluid, it can change. Is it okay if it goes back? Like, okay, you're born a girl, and then gender fluidity takes you to being a boy, but then you go back to being a girl. That can happen, right? So why are detransitioners told that they were never transgender? That doesn't make sense to me. Just ask those questions. And I want to talk about we talked a little bit about the difference between feelings and reasoning. You always do want to validate somebody's feelings. I can see why you would feel that way. If somebody comes home and says, Anne knows that I like Tommy, but Tommy asked her out, and they're going out together now, and I hate them both. It's okay to say, wow, I can see why you'd be angry about that. That would make me angry too. That must hurt. That's validating their feelings. But you don't want to validate the reasoning, a faulty reasoning like, well, I'm going to put rotten eggs in both of their lockers to get back at them. No, that's not a good follow-on logic there. That's not the thing to do when you're hurt. Validate the feelings. I see why you're feeling hurt. That course of action is not the best one for you to follow. We have forgotten that feelings and logic are not the same thing. What I feel does not necessarily represent reality. I don't think we have time for this, and you can all be relieved. I was going to pull somebody up here and say, let's role play a child coming out. But I don't think we have quite time to do that. Well, maybe we do. Hey, I'm at the end. Aaron, can I pull you up? I did not warn her that I was going to do this. I love you. We've actually done this before, and I won't pick on anybody in the audience. So I would just like to role play the way you might handle it if a child comes to you and says, I'm trans-identified. Do you want to be the child? Do you want to be the mom?
I gotta be the child. Okay. Hey, Mom. I just realized I'm actually a boy, and I know you and Dad are gonna be like, no, you're not, but it's really important that you really accept me as your son now.
Wow. I'm surprised to hear this, but I can appreciate that that was really hard for you to tell me. I'm surprised. Can you tell me a little more about how you came to this conclusion?
Well, I'm actually really surprised that you didn't know this because it's been really obvious. If you look, like when I was a little kid, I like to play in the sandbox. I never like to wear dresses. I don't want makeup. I am not like the other girls, and I kind of wish that you and Dad had noticed before this because it would have saved me from a lot of emotional distress if you had just raised me like the son of yours that I really am.
Gosh, I don't remember things exactly like that. It's interesting that we seem to have a little bit different memory. I remember Grandma taking you shopping, and you wanted a frilly white dress. Do you remember that, or am I remembering that wrong? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that, and I thought maybe if I dress like the other girls, then I'll feel like the other girls. But it didn't work. It just made me feel even more awkward and clumsy.
Huh, that's so hard. That must be really hard. I want to know more about this. I want to, find out what do you hope's going to happen? What do you want to happen? Because I don't really believe that someone can be born in the wrong body, but I believe you're really hurting, and I want to do what I can to help you. But I don't think somebody can be born in the wrong body. But what can I do that would help you?
Well, you don't really have to believe it because it's true. So what I want from you is just to accept that I'm your son from now on. And my name's Aiden. And if you can just introduce me as your son from now on, that's all I need. And I know it's going to be really hard for you because I'm pretty sure you and Dad are transphobic. So if you can just accept it, then we'll have a good relationship. But if not, it's going to be really difficult for me to live under your roof.
Gosh, this sounds really hard. But, you're asking me to do something that I don't really think God agrees with, because God made you a female. I mean, do you understand that you have a female body?
I don't think you understand the science, that there's actually, it's possible for boys to have vaginas and for girls to have penises. I don't think you really understand that, because this is kind of new science that we have now. And I know that, when you grew up, biology said that chromosomes dictated, what sex we are, but they're way past that now.
I'd be interested in seeing some of these studies. Where did you hear about these studies?
Well, you can go to GLSEN, you can go to the Human Rights Campaign, Trevor Project. It's all over. Pretty much Google it, Mom. And I know it's hard for you guys because you're old-fashioned, but it's really important for you guys to get up with the science.
Well, I'm going to look at some of that. I have not yet seen anything that shows me robust science that says that there can be somebody born in the wrong body. So I'm going to look at that. But are you willing to look at some things that I find as well? Could we look at some studies together?
Yeah, I love science. That's one of the things about being a boy. I love science. And so I'm happy to look at what you find. But I want you to know that most of what you find is going to be kind of outdated. And so we can definitely look at it as long as you'll look at my science.
Well, I'll be happy to look at yours, and we can look at mine, and because, I'm actually a psychologist, and I do science, I do research, so I'm not a boy, though. I mean, you can be a scientist and be a girl, so we can definitely look at some studies together. I would like that.
Mom, you're not a psychologist.
Yes, I am.
Mom, you're not a psychologist, you're a school teacher. It's just silly.
But I have a master's degree in educational psychology, honey.
How long ago did you get the degree, Mom?
We'll keep talking. All right, I'm sorry for pulling you up like that, Erin. So thank you for sitting through all of this, you guys. I'm so pleased that you're here and that you're learning about this, and protecting our kids is just the most important thing we can do. So thank you for all that you're doing toward that end.